Welcome back to the Liberating Generations podcast. I am Regan Claire, and this is my magnificent mother, Dr. Keesha. In this episode, we are going to explore the role trauma plays in post-traumatic growth.
Post-traumatic growth?
What is that?
What is that? What? Wait, we've heard of post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
PTSD.
I've never heard of this term, post-traumatic growth.
So I can tell. Have you never?
No, you've talked to me about it.
Okay. It's like, are you listening?
No, it's for the audience, Mom.
Okay.
Can you explain what post-traumatic growth is?
So one of the things that will happen is we have stressful events in our lives, right? And hopefully, if we have the willingness present, then we can learn from them. And so we have post-traumatic growth.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times people that have had cancer or autoimmunity, such as myself, will say, that's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Even really traumatic events, like, I know this sounds terrible, and I'm only speaking from my own self.
Mm-hmm.
Childhood sexual abuse, that actually, I can look at that now, having healed and gone through these different steps and layers, and say that really was something that put me on my path to growth, in the way that helping develop different stages of adult development. So that's post-traumatic growth.
Thank
right?
you.
It's being able to have the willingness to take a look at the places where I call it misery to motivation level, right? Where there's a lot of misery, and saying, okay, let's get motivated about finding the places where I'm present in my story. So that means that every time I'm unhappy, I'm there.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something here around my perceptions. And we did a whole episode about the healing and resolved trauma study and the model. So we can refer people to that one and then build from there to talk about this.
Yeah.
Right?
I love that.
Okay. So maybe we should lay some groundwork. What's your definition of trauma?
Well, we've talked about it in this show before, but trauma is basically anything that you've gone through in your life that you didn't have the tools to process.
Yeah, it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Nobody there to help you navigate it. So then with whatever stage of development you're at, you make up beliefs and meanings about it. Those are tied to the nervous system response in your body, frozen in there. And then there's an adaptive behavior that will be built that is to match that meaning and belief. But then as we grow and evolve, and our brain develops from childhood to adulthood, and we have a prefrontal cortex that's fully on board, then those are outmoded ways of believing, right? The meanings we made were maybe not adult ones any longer. And then the adaptive behavior patterns that were really important for us to survive with are now outdated, and they're maladaptive.
Right.
Yeah. So oftentimes I hear people say, this could trigger people. I want to ask for what's Rumi's poem, out beyond the field of right doing and wrongdoing, or out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. I'm going to invite people to meet us there
in the field,
out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, just because there's going to be some stuff that is said in this particular episode that might be triggering. Like when you find yourself saying, I didn't deserve that. Yeah. It's probably true. You didn't. When you're a child, you absolutely didn't deserve whatever abuse, trauma, neglect, abandonment, betrayal, heartbreak that you went through.
Yeah.
And yet in life, those things happen anyway.
Mm.
And so the idea that you didn't deserve it is an important one for you to hold for your child self, so that you can repair and heal that one.
Mm-hmm.
And on the adult stage, where the vision is bigger, to begin to radically accept, this is the part that can be hard, that those things happen anyway, even when children don't deserve them. Yeah. How can both of those things be true, right?
Right.
It's a lot of complexity that the child mind and brain isn't prepared for. Yeah.
And it's something we don't really discuss
Mm-hmm.
in our society,
Mm-hmm.
where we get pretty stuck on the trauma story
Mm-hmm.
and the victim story. The trauma story perpetuates a victim story if you hold on to the trauma story.
Mm-hmm.
And that also might ruffle some feathers. That also might be very triggering to say. But when you feel into it and you look into it, there's some truth there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're coming from today.
Say more about that.
I think we are told, I mean, okay, I won't speak for everyone. I'll speak for myself. I think I've been told in my life to stand tall in what's happened to me, tell my story, don't quiet my voice, because for so long, women have been told to just stay quiet. And so that's what I've done. I've stood tall. I've told my story. But then there comes a point where if I hold on to the story of what's happened to me, and I'm going to continue to perpetuate it. And in that, like, if someone has harmed me and that is my narrative, then I become victim. And we talk a lot in our circle about the role of perpetrator, victim, and rescuer, and how every single one of us has played all of those roles, every single one of those roles. But victim is actually the most powerful role there is.
Well, it's not, but it is a way of getting power.
It's a way of getting power. When I look at it, though, the victim story, that narrative, that's a very powerful one when you're speaking out against someone who has wronged you. Because, I mean, I've played this role in my life. Absolutely. I use it as a way to get people to be on my side, to come to my aid, to understand me. And then in my experience, when the person doesn't get it, or they don't take my side, or they see all sides of the picture, then I feel wounded and angry. And then the story just keeps on getting perpetuated. Like, I'm harming myself in that process.
So I'm writing a few things here to share around power. So what you just described, of course, is the drama triangle, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if there's drama, there's always going to be a rescuer, a victim, and a perpetrator. And in one conversation, we can flip between those roles really fast, right? We can go from victim to perpetrator and rescuer. The thing that's really important about all of this is, if we come back to what our true nature is, which is bounded, unbounded, pure, stainless, unconditional love. Yeah. Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, divine spark, all of those things that we actually are, then the statements that these roles are built off of obscure that in us, and render us not unbounded consciousness. pure awareness.
Yeah.
So rescuer is built off of, I'm okay, you're not okay. So I have the answers for you. I'm here to help. Yeah. Perpetrator is also built off of, I'm okay and you're not okay. And then victim is, I'm not okay and you're okay. Right. And actually, in all of the stories that are from an adult, larger view, we're all okay always.
Right.
Even if things aren't going the way we want them to, even if things are unfair, even if, right?
Yeah.
Circumstances are what we think we have to have in order to feel safe, but we're all really okay because we are unbound in potential. So power then, which is what you were pointing to earlier, we have ways that we can overpower. And that's where we unilaterally believe our needs are more important than another. So we could say like colonialization, right? War, dominance, all of these things were examples of overpowering, but you can also do that in a conversation.
Yeah.
Where my needs are clearly more important than yours, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my needs met over yours. And then underpowering is when you agree to that.
Right.
Oh, you're right. I'm not okay. I need to be rescued. So underpowering is the victim.
Right.
Right space. Power alignment says we're both okay. We both have needs that are equally important.
Yeah.
And we're respectful enough of each other to know that if we come into the place, the field of beyond right doing and wrongdoing, that we can collaborate and begin to negotiate those needs. Yeah. So power alignment never happens in this place.
In the drama
triangle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So victim role, holding on to that is such a power play because nobody can argue with you when you pull out your story of whatever victimization that you had.
Right. It's hard to argue with that.
Yeah. And, like it's a stalemate.
Yeah.
Checkmate.
Who is your experience?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it keeps you so small. So the map that I'm presenting right now comes from a couple of sources. One of them is one of my mentors. And when he draws this, it's so lovely because it's so obvious that, from childhood innocence, we have to have heartbreak, trauma, and betrayal in order to attain wisdom. And so that's like, oh, this is post-traumatic growth. Like trauma, heartbreak, betrayal are necessary parts of human life. But along the way, until we realize that when we're children, of course, we don't deserve any of it. We don't realize it. We're not complex thinkers. We go into survival mode and we build our false self. The aspects of our ego that we've talked about in other episodes with the Enneagram, we can talk about parts work in another episode, but these are the building of this is to protect our innocent psyche. And we don't realize that we're actually obscuring, right, this luminous self because, right, those aspects of ourselves keep us really small and tight. Yeah. So when we have a victim story as our way of getting power, keeps us locked right in here, and we have a lot of resentment and bitterness. And that's what we then bathe ourselves in. Yeah. It leads to illness. I mean, this is what I see with patients with cancer and autoimmunity. So when I work with people to reverse their autoimmune disease and get their cancer into remission, I'm working here. Like, what is this made out of? Right. Can we heal the heartbreak? And that happens through this pathway here of compassionate curiosity and self-confrontation and a real commitment to growing awake awareness to recognize your own true nature. So that healing involves integration and eventually liberation. And the byproduct of it is compassion as we attain wisdom, which is post-traumatic growth. And we start recognizing that in our own true nature, we're never separate from source. We're down here, we believe we're alone.
Right.
Right? So alone and locked in this story, and this bitterness and resentment is life hasn't treated me fairly. It hasn't given me what I deserve. Right? Yeah. And so it's coming out of this idea that there is something different that we're supposed to have. The expectation, the entitlement that no. This is not supposed to be this way. Right?
Right.
I think in one of our episodes, we talked about this with grieving the life we think we should have had.
Yep.
Dropping into the life we actually are living.
Yeah.
With radical acceptance, compassion for self and all others.
Yeah.
And really recognizing our own true nature, then we give up the ideas of what things should be, what our body should be, what everyone else should be doing, what the government should be doing, what the, like all of it, right? Yeah, what those other people, those narcissists, those toxic people, we really start going internal and becoming awake to our own thoughts and perceptions instead of worrying so much about what everyone else is doing. There's a lot right here that needs to be dealt with.
No, there's that saying, stay in your own lane.
Yeah.
And it's the saying for a reason.
Yeah. So this is just like a recap of the hurt model. I call it the detox, retox roller coaster, where we get really toxic in that frustration and bitterness and resentment that things aren't going the way that we think they should. Right. And our thought processes, our perceptions about that come from these childhood beliefs and meanings that we created in response to hurtful events, right? So whenever someone comes and pushes our button and we feel the same thing, like anger or hurt or sadness or
that thing
fear,
that we felt when we were a child that lives in our nervous system.
Lives in the body and in the nervous system. Yes, that ANS, this autonomic nervous system, the freeze state of childhood. Then, right, from that belief, we create our adaptive behavior. But then when we get into adulthood, it's no longer adaptive. Right? Now it's maladaptive.
Yeah.
So we get this really great opportunity over and over again in adulthood to re-examine this, right? Be willing to self-confront, which is over here. Then we heal and we have freedom and we get post-traumatic growth. That if we stay over here looping on what should not have happened or should have happened, right? Then we have our automatic negative thoughts that we ruminate on, creates a lot of judgment and disease eventually. This actually scientifically proven causes disease, right? The more that you do this, and this is the retoxification. And the interesting thing is, like, Ayurvedic medicine 5 to 10,000 years ago said we're not just our physical structure, we're also our energy body, our emotional and mental body, our wisdom self, and our connection to the Akashic records, our spiritual portal, the unconscious collective, right? That Carl Jung talked about. So when we think about, like, in this red layer, if you're looking at the screen, is our mental emotional body. All of these stored beliefs and meanings are in here. They get fed to the physical body every single time someone pushes our button again in adulthood through the 72,000 energetic channels we have. And then it causes us to express genetics that we have that are coded for disease. It makes the immune system go nuts because we're reactive in our minds, and then our immune system gets reactive and our hormone system gets reactive, and we wind up with adrenal fatigue and gut microbiome issues and all of the things that people want to just focus on that in the physical structure, but they're not realizing it's coming from here. Right?
God.
Yeah. Coming from our stored reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So creating a gap between the stimulus, like someone pushes your button,
Right.
and the reaction. Instead, we start learning how to have skillful responses. How do we get there?
Well, that takes practice, obviously. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers and it happens overnight. I think,
It's not one and done.
no, never ends. Never ends.
It'd be so nice if it were.
Tell me about it, sister. No, I feel like what's helped me has been our community. I have a lot of people who are working on this exact thing. It's creating a safe container for yourself and making an agreement within that container that this is something that you can all actively work on together. And not everyone has that. Obviously, we don't all have that resource. And so it's, if you do feel like you have safe connections in your life, even if it's just one or two people, it's making that agreement with that one person, those two people, that we're working on this together. I'm actively going to talk through my process as it's happening. You can bring a situation to that friend, talk through the situation with the friend and say, okay, maybe I didn't respond as well as I would have liked. I went into my trauma response. Absolutely. But it's bringing that awareness to the situation that makes all of the difference. You bring the situation to another person and it's role playing. You role play it and you walk through how you would like to do it in the future. And it takes practice. And then all of a sudden it gets easier.
Yeah. So you were reacting within a nanosecond. And then as you're practicing, now the reactions happen, but you can go back and say, oh, I just realized I reacted to that from my 5-year-old state.
Right.
Can I do a do-over with you?
Yeah.
And then maybe that took a day to get there.
Yeah.
And then maybe it takes
Sometimes
a half
does.
a day. Maybe it took a week, a month, 3, 4 years. I mean, we can get real here, can't we?
Yeah.
Okay. We just last weekend had a plant medicine retreat. We had family of origin present.
Yeah. My dad was there and my stepmom with my mom facilitating.
Oh, beautiful.
It was beautiful. Yeah.
Your sister and your brother and sister-in-law. I mean, it was so beautiful. So there's a saying, Harish Jahari was credited with it. So if you think you're enlightened, go back and spend a few days with your family of origin and then come back and tell me if you're still enlightened. And it is family of origin. You get into that reactivity state pretty quickly because your agreements with each other have been from those developmental states very young, right? And so practicing in a trauma healing circle with this information, these drawings, this map, actually there are 4 maps that we used, and then having agreements from all parties that this is where we want to go as post-traumatic growth, rather than cycling and circling and swirling in the same old stories that are keeping us suffering. Whew, that's the willingness that we always talk about, right?
Yeah. And for a long time, my parents weren't willing, that wasn't an agreement at all. And so I did a lot of this processing without them. I wasn't able to process directly with my stepmom, directly with my dad. But over time, they've seen what we're up to. I invited them and they showed up. And
so courageously. Such an inspiration.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful.
And
that gap was created between reactivity and response. Does that mean there'll always be skillful responding going forward into the future?
No, absolutely not.
But there's an agreed upon method where that can be practiced
Yep.
again and again and again.
There's languaging there now. where there wasn't before.
And so much love and vulnerability. Once vulnerability is shown, then compassion can arise, right? And having the understanding that loss of innocence in childhood is essential. I mean, this is what the whole Garden of Eden story in Genesis is about, right? Eating from the tree of knowledge. So betrayal, heartbreak, rejection, trauma, and knowing that that is a path that has to be taken. Each of us is Adam and Eve, and feeling like thrown out of the Garden of Eden is that felt sense that disconnected from source, which is never accurate. Just because you're not in the garden doesn't mean you're not connected to God. And so, you know, putting clothes on is very symbolic of obscuring your luminous nature, right?
Yeah.
And then the story is suffering. So the willingness to take that journey out, wow, with compassionate self-inquiry and drop resentment and bitterness and gain compassion for self and all, then trauma becomes wisdom. Post-traumatic growth.
It's beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I feel so grateful.
Same.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Never in a million years that I have envisioned what happened last weekend. Never. And we still, I mean, this is life. We still have a brother who is not coming to circle, you know, who
he has his own spiritual path.
He has his own spiritual path, but it's not all rainbows, obviously. Yeah.
Rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course not. Never is with family dynamics.
So if anyone's interested in this work, right? We do retreats monthly.
Yeah.
Love to have you join the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful souls doing some incredible work. I mean, it's an inspiration and an honor to get to be alongside them as they each unpack all of this. As we each unpack our stories.
And the beautiful thing about group is that sometimes we don't even realize that we have a story until we hear someone else tell theirs and go, oh, I have some of that one too. I didn't even realize it was operating under the surface there. Yeah.
And the way that everyone shows up and just holds each other, literally and figuratively, I mean, truly the most supportive environment I've ever experienced. Just so grateful.
Yeah, me too. All right. So that's the pathway from loss of innocence through betrayal, heartbreak, trauma, to the attainment of wisdom and compassion, shedding resentment and bitterness, right? And false self. Yeah. It's
stepping into your luminous,
your true power, right? Being power aligned with all that is, giving up the desire to have the victim story as your way of having power.
Amen.
Because it keeps you small.
Amen to that.
Amen to that. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, be well.